Many people today feel confused trying to decide which type of car and fuel is right for them.
So today we've got the new hybrid Toyota Corolla and we're going to be putting it up against a petrol Volkswagen-Golf and a diesel Ford Focus to find out which makes most sense for most buyers.
We're going to compare these cars in every key area and crunch the numbers to tell you exactly which one makes most sense. And if at the end of this video you want to buy any of these cars, don't forget, go to whatcar.com to get the very best deal on them. And of course, please make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel with the bell icon turned on, because we have great new videos coming out every single week. So let's start with the car that you're probably most familiar with. It's the Volkswagen-Golf. Now, this is the 7th generation of this car, and it was first released in 2012, and it is going to be replaced later this year, but don't write this off as a has-been. We're testing it with a 3-cylinder, 1-litre turbocharged petrol engine, which is one of the most efficient and impressive of its kind. We're also testing it in match trim, which is designed to appeal to company car drivers and private buyers alike. And of course, it's a Golf, so the rest of the package isn't too shabby either, which is why it's always ranked towards the sharp end of the family car class.
But the Ford Focus is an even bigger seller. Now, just like the Golf, you can have a petrol engine if you want, but in this test, the Focus is flying the flag for diesel. Now, we know there's a lot of anti-diesel feeling around at the moment, but this car has a 1.5 litre diesel engine that meets the latest Euro 6D emission standard, so it's much cleaner and more efficient than the older diesel models that are getting a lot of bad press. The Focus was only launched last year, so it's pretty new, and we've chosen sporty ST line trim because of its popularity.
Diesel has lost a lot of fans recently, but hybrids have become very on trend. So we've got the super trendy new Toyota Corolla, which is significantly better than the Auris that it replaces. Now, it isn't a plug-in hybrid, so that means that you can't complete your daily commute on electricity alone, but there is enough electric juice to keep the engine quiet at times and boost its performance at others. Which is why, even though it has the biggest engine here, a 1.8 litre naturally aspirated petrol engine, it actually has the lowest CO2 emissions of the lot. But to start off with this test, we're going to look inside each car first. So the good news is all three cars offer a comfortable place to sit. As standard, they get a front centre armrest, a height adjustable driver's seat, and impressively, adjustable lumbar support. Plus, every single one gets a steering wheel that adjusts not only for height, but for reach too. Now, the Golf. It's always provided a fine example of a smart interior, even if it hasn't quite lived up to the same exemplary standards as the Audi A3. But still, in this Golf, even though maybe the design is just starting to show its age a little bit, it is one of the best interiors in the class. The materials maybe aren't particularly special, but they feel very durable, they're pretty soft to touch, it's nice to look at, and generally every area of this interior is impressive. This one doesn't have it, but we definitely recommend going for the Golf's optional digital dials. They are the most configurable of the displays that you have available here and deliver lots of information to the driver. It's definitely worth a tick on the options list. Now, the infotainment system in the Golf. I don't want to ruin the punchline, but I will. It's the best infotainment system here. The resolution and graphics are as crisp and clear as they are on an iPad's, and it's very responsive to touch inputs. But the only slightly annoying thing are these touchscreen shortcut buttons either side of the main screen, because just when you're driving, because they aren't physical buttons, they're not quite as easy to poke and prod as they are if they were actual physical buttons. You do though get these dials either side of the screen. This one controls the volume, and isn't it annoying that this standby sign moves with the dial? I'd much rather that it stay in the same place, but maybe that's just me. And this one on the other side helps you scroll through some of the menus, which is useful as well. The other good thing is that this infotainment system comes loaded with kit. So you get SatNav, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as well.
Now, you might not be able to have fancy digital instruments like you can in the Golf, but actually the old school analog dials in the Focus are really clear and easy to see, and there's a small screen between the speedo and the rev counter that shows important bits of driving info like your fuel economy. And overall, the Focus has the best driving position here as well, because the seat is nice and supportive, there's lots of adjustment, and there's lots of movement in the steering wheel as well. Now, there is some soft touch material up here on top of the dashboard, but there's also quite a lot of low rent plastic around the Focus's interior, like down here, for example, and this fake carbon fibre trim on the face of the dashboard. Also, build quality, it's a little bit iffy, so overall, the Focus does feel the cheapest inside. Mind you, effort has been made in some areas because the front door pockets, just like the ones in the Golf, they are carpeted, so you can put things like keys in them and they won't jangle around too much when you're driving. The Focus's 18-inch touchscreen is mounted nice and high up on the dashboard, so I don't have to look too far from the road to see it or to reach it either. But some of the icons are quite small, the screen resolution isn't great either, and it sometimes takes quite a while to respond after you've pressed it.
In the Corolla, generally throughout, the materials are pretty impressive, although not quite as good as the ones that you find in the Golf. However, it is at least as solidly built as the Golf is, which is very good. Not quite so good is the range of adjustment on offer in the steering wheel, because it's the least of any of the cars here. Plus, the footwell's the tightest as well, so if you're a clown, you're going to be least comfortable driving the Corolla, that's for sure. Another problem is, perhaps this is a personal thing, but to adjust the angle of the backrest in the Corolla, you have to lift this lever and then move it into a slot that's already predefined where the seat should go. Now, it just means that you've got to put up with one of those spaces, regardless of whether it's particularly comfortable or not. A much easier thing is what the other two cars get, which are the dials that you can turn to fine tune it to whatever degree you'd like to get exactly the right driving position for you. So, a bit annoying that you can't also do that in the Corolla. However, the digital instrument dials are very, very simple compared to the Rubik's Cube that is this infotainment system. So not only does it have a fairly complicated layout, but look at it. I mean, the graphics don't look like the graphics of an infotainment system on a brand new car, do they? You do get physical shortcut buttons though on either side, which is pretty useful, although they're quite small, so they're still relatively difficult to hit on the move, but they are useful from jumping between menus. But the very, very worst thing about this infotainment system is that it doesn't offer Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. So that means that you are stuck using this pretty ancient software. As for space, all three cars have enough room to accommodate tall adults in the front, but it's in the rear where they differ.
The Golf has the most rear headroom, so it feels quite light and airy in the back here. Rear legroom is nothing special, but it's decent enough.
In the Focus, headroom might not be quite as impressive in the back as it is in the Golf, but it's still perfectly fine for most tall adults. But rear legroom is the best. You also have the best space on offer under the driver's seat for your feet, and it has the best space for a middle passenger, including the lowest central tunnel, so you don't have to awkwardly put your feet either side of it. Overall, it's the best car in the back.
The Corolla is pretty disappointing for rear space though. If you're around 6 feet tall, you'll feel a bit cramped in the back. Not only does it have the least leg and headroom of our contenders, it's also the most difficult to get in and out of.
As for the boots, well, all three are a fairly similar size, but we managed to fit 6 of these carry-on sized suitcases, thanks Will, into the back of the Focus and the Corolla. However, when you put them into the Corolla with 6 in here, there's a bit more space left over compared to the Focus, and that is even with this slightly more awkward boot shape that you have in the Corolla. The most disappointing of the 3 is the Golf, because we only managed to fit 5 of these in the boot.
But how much do these 3 cars cost to buy, and how much do they cost to run? Here are the key things that you need to know.
If you're a company car buyer, the Golf will cost you the least in benefit in kind tax, followed by the Corolla, and the Focus is the most expensive.
The Golf is the cheapest to lease over 3 years, and it's also the most affordable per month if you're buying on PCP finance.
As for fuel costs, well, the Corolla is particularly efficient in urban areas, so that's part of the reason it achieved such an impressive fuel economy result in our tests of 60.6 miles per gallon, the best of the bunch.
Being a diesel, the Focus is unsurprisingly the most efficient at high speeds, which is something worth bearing in mind if you spend your life pounding up and down a motorway. In our real-world tests, it averaged a respectable 53 miles to the gallon.
The Golf, meanwhile, is the least frugal here, with an average of 46.5 miles per gallon. To put that into context, if you were to do 12,000 miles a year for 3 years, then the Golf would cost you £1,000 more in fuel than the Corolla, and 250 quid more than the Focus.
All 3 cars come with alloy wheels, air conditioning, electric windows and powered door mirrors. The Corolla is the most generously equipped as standard though, because it also has heated front seats and LED headlights. The Focus is the only one without adaptive cruise control, but it's also alone in having a heated windscreen, which is very handy on those frosty mornings.
As for safety, each car gets automatic emergency braking as standard, and this is complemented by lane keeping assistance in the Corolla and the Focus. The Corolla also gets traffic sign recognition, which is optional on the others. However, it doesn't get blind spot monitoring, which is available on the Golf and the Focus.
Now the Golf may only have a tiny 1 litre engine, but actually it's pretty nippy and it pulls quite well even from low revs. Predictably, it can get a little bit vocal when you work it hard, but thankfully the thrummy noise it makes isn't at all unpleasant. The stop-start system is quite frustrating though, because sometimes it takes a while to fire the engine back into life, and there's also a bit of a judder when it does so. The 6-speed manual gearbox is pretty smooth, but it's not as slick as the one in the Focus. Both the Golf and the Corolla are better at absorbing bumps in the road than the Focus, and actually they're two of the comfiest cars in this class. And the Golf is great to drive in other respects as well. It's got really nicely weighted steering, even if it's not quite as fun to drive through the corners as a Focus.
Now, the Focus ST line suspension is a disadvantage. It's not horrendous, but it's firmer over potholes and it also fidgets the most on motorways as well. However, if you're a keen driver, then the payoff is brilliant handling. The Focus is great to drive and it does have really light, quick steering that can take some getting used to, but once you have, it is absolutely brilliant to drive quickly. And it's just almost like it's made for these British back roads that we're on here as well. It's a properly fantastic car to drive. So if you plant your foot from 1500 RPM, the diesel engine's torque offers effortless progress. And it's really impressive in that regard, although it does have a slightly narrower operating window than the Golf's. So below 1500 RPM, it feels pretty flat. And then being a diesel, it runs out of path at around 4500 RPM. And also, while the Golf's engine is pretty nice to listen to, the Focus's isn't. It's not bad for a diesel, but it's certainly by far the grumbliest of the three cars that are here. And it only really settles into the background on the motorway at about 70 miles an hour, at which point you'll notice that road and wind noise is impressively quiet, which is better than the Golf and much better than the Corolla.
The Corolla accelerates in the most leisurely fashion, but it is the only car here with an automatic gearbox as standard. Now, the auto gearbox is called a CVT, so it's a little bit different from regular autos, and we explain that in more detail in our full Corolla review that you can watch by clicking up there at the top of the screen. But all you really need to know is that when you accelerate anything other than really gently, the revs rise quite suddenly and they stay high until you're up to the speed you want to be doing, almost as if you're stuck in first gear, except the speed keeps on increasing, and obviously that does create quite a lot of noise. But as long as you are gentle, the Corolla is actually pretty quiet, and it can even power itself on pure battery power at low speeds for short distances, which is great when you're in stop-start traffic. On many hybrids, the brakes can be quite frustrating because they tend to be quite grabby, and that makes it difficult to slow down smoothly. Now, the Corollas aren't perfect, but they are among the best hybrids we've tried, although the brakes are still smoother in the Golf and the Focus. It's also the least agile through corners and ultimately the least fun to drive of our three cars. But it's still decent enough to drive by the wider standards of the family car class, thanks to accurate steering and plenty of grip.
These three cars are difficult to separate, but in third place it's the Focus diesel because it has the cheapest feeling interior and the least comfortable ride. It's still a fine choice if you want a great handling car, and also this diesel engine could save you some money on fuel if you do loads of motorway miles. Second place is the Corolla. It's one of the best hybrids yet, and not only is it an efficient mode of transport, but in general it's a good car all round, although it is beaten here on rear seat space and infotainment.
So the winner is the petrol Golf. It's the cheapest option if you're buying on PCP finance or you're a company car driver. It has the smartest interior and the best infotainment system. It might be the oldest model here, but it's still a great buy.
Go to whatcar.com to read our extended written reviews of these three and every other new car on sale. And save yourself some money by buying your next car through whatcar.com as well.